when we were ready to leave the glorious temple, and turn to the region of little bazaars and big hotels, fair gardens, and girls with tennis rackets whose shape reminded our Egypt-steeped minds of the key of life. Monny and Brigit had slipped away. Their real day was just beginning. My heart was with them, Anthony's too, and his work permitted him to conduct his heart along the way that they must take, while I had to conduct the set to the Winter Palace Hotel and give them tea on the terrace. When everybody was rested and had had enough strawberry tarts, view and flirtation, we were to make for the Temple of Mut, and having returned at last to Enchantress Isis, were to steam away just as tourist boats and dahabeahs were lighting up along the shore. We were to dine late, after starting, and anchor in some dark solitude, so as to enjoy a peaceful, dogless night on the Nile. But what would have happened to Brigit and Monny before the sounding of that dinner gong? What did happen at the beginning I must tell as best I can, because I was not there, and can speak for myself only from the Temple of Mut. When they stole almost secretly away from Karnak, they took an arabeah which was waiting, and drove to the sugar plantation of Rashid Bey. This place of his is not prepared for a lengthy or luxurious residence, but, as I have said, there is a house. There is also a small gatehouse, in a somewhat neglected condition, but a gatekeeper was there, the usual stout negro. Monny and Biddy were quivering with fear lest they should be refused admission, as at Asiut, but this time their coachman was Ahmed Atoun, carefully disguised as a common driver of an arabeah, a rather exaggeratedly common driver perhaps, for his face and turban were not as clean as the face and turban of a self-respecting Muslim ought to be. He had been helped to play this trick by one of the secret friends he had made in some café or other, the cousin of an uncle of a brother of him who should have sat on the box seat. But the motive he had alleged was not the real one. The two beating hearts in the arabeah had confidence in him. If the gatekeeper tried to send them away, Antoun would bribe him, or threaten him with black magic, or say some strange word which would be for them as an open sesame. The fat creature at the gate had no French, but the driver of the arabeah addressed him in Arabic, and translated his answers. Yes, the great lady had come hither with her husband the Bey. Word should go to her. It should be ascertained whether it was her pleasure to receive these friends who had journeyed from a far country to pay her a visit. Monny and Brigit sat in the arabeah to wait, but they dared not talk to the dirty-faced driver, lest some spy should be on the watch, where every group of flowering plants might have ears and eyes. Even if the big gatekeeper came back with an excuse, as seemed too probable, there was hope from Anton's diplomacy, but the chances were 2 to 1 against success. Rashid Bey had almost certainly been put on his guard by the revengeful Bedr who had shown himself all grinning friendliness to us. Rashid might have tired of playing dragon, as Antoun prophesied, yet it would be strange if he had not given instructions that no European ladies were to visit his wife. Mabella Hânem had been snatched in haste from Asiut, but if she were still in Luxor with her husband, she and her women in the harem would be guarded by eunuchs, as in the more ambitious villa which Rashid called his home. I suppose Anthony, slouching on the box seat in his unattractive disguise, must have been as much astonished as Monny and Brigit when the gatekeeper returned with another big negro to say that the ladies would be welcomed by Mabella Hânem. The two girls were wildly delighted. Fenton's emotions were mixed. He wanted to save the American bride from the consequences of her tragic mistake, but he cared more for his friend's safety than for hers. He knew that Monny and Brigit were brave, and that Monny had his Browning, but the thought that she might need to use it could not have made him comfortable in the box seat of his borrowed arabeah, outside Rashid's gate. It was arranged that he should give Mabel's visitors 1 hour, thus allowing for delays and emergencies, but if they did not appear at the end of that time, he would dash off to tell the Luxor police that 2 ladies were detained against their will in the house of Rashid Bey. Once in charge of the chief eunuch, who had come to take them to the harem, Brigit and Monny might almost as well been deaf and dumb. But Brigit knew practically nothing of Arabic, and Monny, though she had been vaguely studying since her arrival, had been too passionately occupied with other things to give much time or attention to the language of Egypt's invaders. Her blood was beating in her veins now, and she could think of no words except Ishmi, Malish, and Masalama. These buzzed in her head like persistent flies, as she and Biddy followed their silent, white-robed and turbaned conductor along a narrow pink path, toward a modern villa almost shrouded with bougainvillea. And they were the last words she needed. She didn't want to tell the ponderous negro to get out. On the contrary, she wished to be polite. So, far from saying no matter, everything mattered intensely. And unfortunately it was not time yet to bid the creature farewell. Behind the white house with its crimson embroidery of flowers rose a thick growth of tall sugar cane, the shimmering green pale as beryl in the dreaming light which precedes sunset. The dark red of the bougainvillea looked like streaming blood against such a background. Though the villa appeared to be comparatively new, it was built according to Turkish, not European ideas, as it might have been were the owner a Copt instead of a Mohammedan. The building was in two parts, entirely separating the Semalik from the Haremlik. The latter was small and insignificant compared with the former, for this was not a place prepared for family life. It was but a temporary dwelling, where the master would more often come alone than with the ladies of his harem. The eunuch opened a door leading into the women's building, and Brigit and Monny entered the same secretive sort of vestibule they must have remembered in the House of the Crocodile. A screen wall prevented them from seeing what was beyond, and the dead silence frightened them a little, so easy was it to make of this place a trap. In the vestibule was a long, cheaply cushioned bench, the resting place of the women's custodian, and upon it lay spread open the eunuch's well-used Koran, which he had deserted to meet the visitors. Who had given him the order to go, and why it had been given, the guests began to ask themselves. Beyond the screen wall they entered an anteroom. Through a big window door they could look into a small grassy court that served as a garden, and opening from the anteroom was a second room much larger, which also gave upon the garden court. At the door of this the eunuch bowed himself away, but an involuntary glance which Monny threw at him over her shoulder showed that he was grinning. The grin died quickly as a white flash of heat lightning fades from a black night sky, but though the heavy face composed itself respectfully, there remained a disquieting tinkle in the full-lidded eyes. It struck Monny that the negro was amusing himself at the expense of the visitors, because of something he knew which they did not know. "We're not going to be allowed to see Mabel," she thought, with a jump of her pulses, and even when a negress, smiling invitingly, beckoned her and Biddy into the large room whose 3 windows looked on the garden, she still believed that they had been deceived. She did not, however, speak out her conviction to Brigit. Nothing could be done yet. They must wait and see what happened. The room was furnished in abominable taste, with cheap trench furniture, upholstered with blue brocade that clashed hideously with the scarlet carpet. There were several sofas and chairs stiffly arranged round the walls, but no tables, save low maidahs of carved wood inlaid with pearl, such as they had seen in Cairo bazaars and hotels. The windows were closed, and the air heavy, as in a room seldom used. The two seated themselves close together, on one of the ugly sofas, facing a door through which the beckoning negress had gone out. There was no sound except the harsh ticking of a huge bulbous clock, all gilding and flowers, which stood in a corner. Monny's and Brigit's eyes met, with a question. Who would open the door just closed? Would it be Mabel, or would Rashid Bey stride in, to reproach or insult them? "Are you sure it's loaded?" Biddy whispered. No need for Monny to ask what she meant. "Sure," she answered. The handle of the door turned. End of chapter 21.